Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. That entry is not valid. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. Thank you. Please stand by. You are being put into conference in listen-only mode. There are 41
entering grades 5 through 8. The RFP just recently closed, and we are currently reviewing proposals with an anticipated start date of July 1st for that.
That's coming out of the $2.5 million.
Yeah, so we have half of that is going to support after-school programs, so $1.25 million a year. We're really excited about that. We received around 18 proposals. We just closed, and now we're reviewing, and it has statewide reach, so from organizations that serve youth all across the state. So we've also worked closely with the Division of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Education to enhance their existing grants for the purposes of expanding youth leadership and culture camp opportunities, as well as suicide prevention grants and health counselors in Alaska's alternative schools. So we're also investing in public education efforts. So marijuana public education materials are being designed to communicate messages to, 1, help prevent youth marijuana use and progressive use, to educate the public about the risks associated with unsafe marijuana use, such as marijuana-impaired driving, and educate the public about our marijuana laws. So like I mentioned earlier, we recently launched a campaign called Responsible Consumer, where we partnered with 2 Alaskan retailers to convey the messages of safe and responsible use with an emphasis on preventing marijuana-impaired driving and safe storage. So that was really resulted from our initial conversations with marijuana users throughout the state. We learned that marijuana retailers are a trusted source for key information such as laws and safe storage. As part of this campaign, we have also developed a Responsible Consumer Fact Book that many retailers are offering in their storefronts, and we have a lot of copies of these in our office, and I'm happy to send out to those newer retailers that are just getting their licenses and opening up their storefronts. We're also planning to launch a digital survey. We hope that retailers might be interested in promoting the survey. Through the survey, we're planning to ask additional questions of current marijuana users about their knowledge, awareness, attitudes, and behaviors. This information will be used for future program development and improvement and help us monitor trends, trends that we really can't get through our standard survey tools that we have available to us right now. Data from these sorts of surveys informs our public health activities, providing the evidence behind the evidence-based approaches to changing behaviors. The next component is around surveillance, evaluation, and monitoring, and I'll just jump right in unless you guys have any more questions. So this sort of activity creates a series of data points that really helps us answer the question, how has marijuana legalization affected knowledge, awareness, attitudes, and behaviors and use related to marijuana use in Alaska, and are our prevention efforts being successful or not? We're also monitoring population health status to identify trends and potential health outcomes related to marijuana use. So we're tracking data points such as marijuana-impaired driving or motor vehicle crashes, calls to our poison control hotline related to accidental ingestion, tracking emergency room visits by children, and number of people entering treatment with marijuana identified as the primary substance of concern. I do want to say that we have a lot of data points pre-legalization and post-legalization, and we aren't seeing any increase in any of those areas right now. So we want to be really careful because we are seeing a lot of reports and things flagged out of the state of Colorado and also Washington, and really we get a lot of questions, how is Alaska tracking, and we're not seeing any significant increase in any of those measures. But it's really important that we continue to measure them over time.
And the state, and Lauren, I guess you can agree or disagree with me, I think the state of Alaska has done a pretty darn good job over the last couple of decades of tracking public health information, behavioral health information, and substance abuse information. So I think that we can probably express a lot of confidence in what, is out there, like, say, pre-legalization data, and, your statement that there's no particular uptick post-legalization. As soon as you said we're seeing stuff coming in from Colorado and Washington, I think that they've got some pretty high-charge lobbyists on both sides of the game in those states. So, I'm not familiar with their data collection, but I think we can have a lot of confidence in what data has developed and collected and continues to collect.
Yeah, well, we really want to do our best, and really I think methodology matters. So Colorado has a lot of different smaller studies, like the recent one that came out that did show an increase in emergency room visits related to related to all types of marijuana consumption, but the rate of edibles was actually disproportionate to the amount of sales, so they did see a threefold increase in edibles. And what was really important about that Colorado study that Alaska is not doing is that we didn't do a really comprehensive chart review in the way that they did in their EHR chart records. It's something, I think it's a very novel approach, something that we might want to consider in the future, but right now when we just look at our syndromic surveillance data, we're not seeing the same increase. But again, methodology is really different there between the way they were measuring it and how we measure it. Okay. So this component helps us, again, answer those questions. How has marijuana legalization affected Alaskans' health and safety? And monitoring this health status allows our programs to evaluate our progress and also make improvements. And actually, this strategy is where we need your help. We would like to set up a data use agreement with the Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office to access retail sales data. We are interested in learning more about the amounts and the type of products that Alaskan adults are purchasing. Access to these data will help inform our public education and programs that are lined out in the data use agreement, which I believe is part of your packet as well. So I hope that you take a look at that, and if you have any questions, please send them our way, and we can try to flesh that out. But I think that data component will be really important for our program to be able to really, because the tools that we have right now are all self-report through our behavioral risk factor surveillance system. Having those hard data related to sales, while you can't conflate that to actual consumption, at least it'll be nice to know what Alaskans are purchasing so that it can help us with our public education program efforts.
And Eliza, that draft data use agreement is just a couple tabs down on the agenda, so you'll be able to stick around when the board talks about that.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
I was actually hoping we could move it up.
It's up to you guys.
And she's here, and we got... No, I'm going to wait, and I will do that.
Okay, so there's a motion to suspend the rules to consider director briefing item B. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so when you get done with whatever else you got here, then we'll do that.
Okay, great. So I guess we'll move on to the last component, which is around treatment. As the Division of Public Health, we really don't focus on treatment. It's an area that we really lean on our Division of Behavioral Health to focus on. So they do receive 15% of the 25% to focus on treatment within the behavioral health setting. And substance use screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, otherwise known as SBIRT, is an evidence-based practice which assesses for the presence of substance use disorders. Substance use screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment fosters integration of behavioral health care within medical contexts, but can also be used by community behavioral health providers seeking to identify clients at risk for substance use disorders. Identification of substance use behaviors followed by a thorough assessment and individualized treatment recommendations will ensure that the clients struggling with their marijuana use will receive appropriate intervention and services to meet their treatment goals. And that's an area that we're still kind of working out with behavioral health and how they implement and adapt the SBIRT tool, which is primarily used for alcohol use and alcohol screening, to marijuana, really looking at other states that are also adapting SBIRT, such as Colorado and Washington, for marijuana use.
I know SBIRT's used, like out in Bethel, at the Sobering Center and other places. Do they have, do you know, around the state, is marijuana use included right now in SBIRT?
It is, but it could be a lot better, I think, especially now that due to our state having legalized, I mean, I think, this substance is legal. I think people are more willing to talk about their use and whether or not, that there is a substance use disorder, I think is something that we really need to further explore at an individual level with individuals. It's not something that we're going to come out, SBIRT is a population-based tool that I think when used appropriately can be really effective, but we're really figuring out how that works in the context of marijuana legalization.
Sure. And in the behavioral health community, we get people that are dual diagnosed. Maybe you just give us the one-sentence definition of what I mean by dual diagnosed.
So people with co-occurring disorders, so dual diagnosed also mental health in addition to a behavioral health condition, so, alcohol or marijuana inclusive of, a mental illness.
Right. So you kind of straightened me out on the Colorado crack that I made, and thank you for that. So is there any thought in either in your division or in discrete agencies, whether they're private health corporations or tribal health corporations or whomever, to maybe do some chart review work? Have you had any discussions like that with any of the whether it's YK or Providence or any of the providers around the state to try to track, whether there's any kind of a change in ER visits?
Not yet. I think that would be a really interesting case study that we would need to do within kind of a health corporation or just an individual a clinic. I think we don't have the funds to be able to do like a systematic chart review across all of our healthcare clinics, but doing some sort of a pilot I think would be really interesting to see. In Colorado, it was the Colorado University Hospital, so it was a learning and teaching hospital, and Colorado has a lot of marijuana tax dollars that they can use to support that sort of effort. I imagine in the future, though, but depending on where we go with this treatment strategy, I think, and surveillance strategy, that could be a really novel use of those funds.
Okay, great. All right, yes.
The other question I had was, especially looking at data around treatment, if CERT or whatever CERT is population-based, and at least given what's happened in the last 10 years within substance abuse and alcohol, drug abuse, and mental health, the programs are chasing dollars. So they got federal opiate reduction dollars, and they got Medicaid financing. So you're going to find all your diagnoses being, formal diagnoses are being charted so they can get reimbursement, either through the opiate funding from the feds or through Medicaid. And, sort of without chart review, you're never going to see any mention of marijuana individually. I mean, you might on a population base. It may be a contributing factor to a person's behavior, but you're never going to find it in official treatment data because it's just not there. They're chasing the numbers and they're chasing the dollars. In Juneau, they're trying to revamp the program because they got a bunch of opiate money. And so there's going to be populations of people that could get into treatment that won't because they're chasing money with other folks. So I would be cautious on the treatment numbers without doing some of the more chart level reviews or doing something because if you just look at the data that the Division of Behavioral Health puts out, you're not going to see much. If anything, you probably even see a decline because they have to emphasize, the people that have dollars.
Yeah.
So
that's a very important point.
All right, cool. And we hope we'll see you more than just once a year.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Especially in light of the deal we're about to do with you. So we have got a proposed draft data use agreement between State of Alaska Department of Health and Social Services and AMCO for the purpose of accessing marijuana enforcement, tracking, reporting, and compliance, aka metric data. So, Director, you want to run this down real quick for us?
Sure, thank you. So we were approached by the Department of Health and Social Services regarding access to the metric data for the purposes that are laid out in this draft agreement. And we had a meeting and went through a couple drafts, and I definitely wanted the board to be the arbiter of whether or not we enter into this agreement. But my focus in talking with Eliza about this was to make sure that the individual licensee data was protected, the privacy of the licensees, the privacy of their customers, although of course they don't collect customer names. Excuse me. So we have stuff, particularly language, particularly in the second paragraph, about aggregation of data and data suppression protocols when there's fewer than 6 licensees. And I'm going to let Eliza, I understand that, but I think Eliza will be able to articulate it better than I will.
Well, that's similar to school districts. You don't pick out, the Northwest Arctic School District. You do, above the Arctic Circle, or you do Western Alaska if you have individual schools. I understand that.
Right, okay.
I know in a lot of data, in our sales tax data, our sales tax office won't tell me what Fred Meyer does. It'll tell me what big box scores do. They won't tell me what Fireweed's doing, but they'll tell me how much they're collecting in marijuana sales tax.
Right,
So,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm clear on that.
So the things that they wish to track and report, we've discussed how some of these may be more difficult to extract out of the metric data than others, but some things may take a lot of individual looking to, particularly what I'm talking about is the THC percentage of flower. That's not something that can be extracted from metric. So I just wanted to point out that some of these things are not necessarily going to be easy to pull out quickly, but these are the things that they're interested in. So with that, I would refer your questions to Eliza.
So I guess they're more to you at this point. All of this information made sense. I mean, to collect it, as somebody that spent my life in substance abuse in the state government, this is the kind of information I would like. My question was, is it going to be the Division of Public Health programmers going to program the extraction of the data? Or is this something that they would pay Metric to do a standardized extraction that would be done every month? Is this, basically what I'm asking is Public Health going to have direct access, or is Public Health going to have access to a point-in-time database so they're not messing around in a live system? And whose responsibility would it be to write the program to extract the data? Is that us? Is that Metric? Is that Public Health? And 2 reasons for asking it. One is a technical question. I don't want to mess up a live database. And secondly is validity and reliability of the data extraction. Do we know that the program worked and extracted exactly the data that they wanted, that there wasn't some error in that extraction? Because if they publish the information and it came from us, people are going to look to us and say, why are you giving out false information if they don't agree? So that was sort of the more technical question that I had, not so much that I objected to the information collected. But
thank you, Mr. Jones, through the chair. Those are excellent questions. The easiest way to do this is to give one or more employees at DHHS direct read-only access. So they would be entered into Metric as authorized users but not be able to make any changes. The question then becomes running the reports to extract the data, which has to be done through using SQL. And I don't think we've really gotten to that level of who would do that. There's nobody in our office at AMCO who has the knowledge to do that. Sometimes we are able to work with Metric, and they'll help us with that. Metric can certainly do it. I do not know whether Eliza has anyone in her shop who has the knowledge to do that. So I think it would either be they would do it or Metric would do it. There is a note in this agreement that all reports would need to be reviewed and approved by the AMCO director before they are public. So my hope is, in my review of any reports they would have, if there was some, if they had extracted something in a way that came up with a result that didn't make sense, that at least that they, with knowledge that they wouldn't have, that we may have because of our regular involvement in licensing in the industry, I would note, recognize that. So if you have a strong feeling one way or the other, now's the time to get that into the agreement.
Well, I guess, I'm not a techie, but SQL Server was just coming out as I was leaving government, and there was a lot of discussion about how easy or hard that was. But when you're dealing with a complicated database and you give access, and I don't know what the state has done in terms of programming staff and that kind of thing, but something in this agreement should, if public health used a contractor to access the data, I think we would need to know that. Two is if they extracted data in a way that's legitimately extracted but gives us a different look than we usually look, if you formulate a question differently, that statement, all statistics lie and all liars use statistics. I think you might see an anomaly, but there are programmers who say this is exactly how it comes out because this is the way we ask the question. Then I think there's some issues there. So I would say something in here that, the office would need to have some understanding of the questions they were asking and how they collected the data. But in particular, if public health were to contract out for the programming, you'd want to know that. Because, like I said, I don't know if EHSS still has their programming office, but every time I walk down in the basement where they used to be, I never see anybody there. So.
Well, I can answer to the staffing question right now. As part of our Marijuana Education and Treatment Fund, we were able to hire an epidemiologist too, and she does have a SQL coding background, and we did meet with Erica, Director McConnell, in regards to that issue. But of course, staffing changes, so I think that's why this data use agreement will need to be renewed annually because we may not have that person in 2 years either, so that has that unique skill set. And I do understand Metric has a component for some technical assistance as well, and that SQL code had been shared with the office at some point in time in regards to kind of further data collection, but we just weren't there yet to be able to actually get in there and do that with the absence of a data use agreement.
So maybe I'm just skeptical, but I have a lot of privacy concerns, especially for businesses. I'm very concerned at how the data is going to be aggregated. Are you going to do it by the state level? Are you going to, at some point, consider breaking it down by Anchorage, Kenai, Fairbanks? I definitely have a lot of concerns when we talk about giving other people access to the database. I don't disagree that the data here that you would like to have is important, but I would need more definition behind, how the data is going to be pulled, how is it going to be aggregated, and I would be more comfortable if you are going to pay someone to pull the data that we pay Metric to do it and build a report that you can, hopefully someone can just push a button monthly, quarterly, however you want to pull it, but I'm very uncomfortable giving someone access to the database because once they get in there, the sky's the limit. So, again, I think the data is important, but what you're getting, how you're aggregating it, I would like to see that, and I would like to be able to have the board weigh in on that. And if it changes, or you're considering changing it, then we would get to weigh in on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that this data gathering is important, but a couple of things. First of all, I would what are you doing in July? You like Fairbanks in July? It's really nice. It's really nice up there. I'd be willing to push this off until July for a couple of reasons. I'd like to see something in here that expresses a purpose for the agreement, because it's not. It just says it's for the purpose of accessing information, and it'll be used to inform program planning and evaluations. But I'd kind of like to see something on our side. You know, I'd like to see something here that says the board has got a responsibility to the people of the state of Alaska for public health and safety. So I'd like to see that in here. I would also like to see, and you don't have to come to Fairbanks, you can do it over the phone, or, although it's nice in Fairbanks in July. Yeah, don't do it over the phone. Yeah, come to Fairbanks. Hopefully we won't be in the DEC room, which is smaller than this room was. It was nice. It was okay. Nice restaurant next door. I'd like to see, as Lauren was talking about, kind of a model concept. What's your product going to look like? As you said, you might go through epidemiologists like, crazy, every couple of years. But I would hope that you would have a model built, a product designed that no matter who's putting the data in, the product will always look the same. So I'd like to see some discussion of what the product, the end product, is going to look like. I think this is good stuff. The concern about privacy and business information, and I think that's really, when we say privacy, that's what a lot of people mean. In Bethel, the sales tax report has general sales tax, doesn't say whether it came from AC or Swanson's, and then it has alcohol and marijuana sales tax. Well, when you only have one liquor store in Bethel, you know how much business they're doing because they're the only ones paying sales tax. So you're going to have regions of the state, you're going to have communities in the state that have only one licensee or only a couple of them. So, if you're going to do it on a regional basis, maybe just say, rural Alaska, and that way you've got that aggregated. So yeah, this doesn't sound too unreasonable to you. You're not under a big gun to get this project started, are you?
No, our funding is it's general funds, and we don't have any federal grant requirements because we don't have any federal marijuana grants.
Yeah, there you go. I'm just concerned. Does any federal money pay the rent?
To the data suppression thresholds, our standard is to suppress anything that's under.
I mean, you guys got plenty of than that. I mean, there's no question about that. You guys know what you're doing as far as sanitizing data, and so I mean that doesn't concern me. From the business side, they're worried about the competitive thing, and so you'd be able to look and say, well, let's see, in South Anchorage the average price is this, and in North Anchorage the average price is that, and so, anyways. Yeah, so if we can do that, if we can put it together like that, like I said, I really think that the board should have a piece of this more than just, saying, okay. I think we should express a purpose in wanting to be involved in this.
Yeah, I agree. I hope that you would find this information extracted in this way usable as well.
It's a good thing there's no pot pun pot today, or there'd be a lot of quarters in it just with the word extraction today so far. Okay, do you have anything else for us?
No.
Okay, so we'll look for a good solid draft in July, and hopefully get her done.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you for visiting us. Thanks so much. All right, well, we are still on schedule. I saw a couple other people out there raise their hands. Said they're from the state. No, that's it. That's all the state people want to say. Okay, so now we are on tab 4, HTBX International. Come on down. Depends. Yeah. Push the silver button and make the microphone turn red, and then you're good to go.
Thank you. I'm going to take my glasses off. Push this button.
Yeah, you might want to point the microphone towards yourself. There you go.
Hi. Thank you so much for allowing us some time here on the agenda today. Erica, thank you so much. And just a little background real quickly. First, my name's Anita Burke. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Hotbox International. I do want to be clear, I didn't come to Anchorage because you have suddenly embraced on-site consumption. I was up here helping my best friend of 30 years die, basically, for the last 10 months and doing this with our Denver operation. And then all of a sudden, all the on-site activity started happening in Alaska, and I thought, wow, look at this. We've been working closely with Denver, Colorado, in a public-private partnership for the last 5 years. And I'm happy to report that by the end of this month, we will be placing the first ever public-private partnership temporary social cannabis consumption unit. I'm excited to share with you the details of what comes with that package. And so when I came here and started sitting in on meetings and the like, I thought, I want to introduce this to the conversation. Some people have accused me of having an angle. I don't really have an angle here today. I'm an innovator, and I always have been. Growing up here, I helped create the public-private partnership that created the hazardous waste, household hazardous waste collection facility at the municipality of Anchorage. As an example, when I was the first commissioner of the Hazardous Materials Commission for the city of Anchorage, it's an example of looking for solutions, right? And not getting caught up in like, and I'll get to that in a minute because the hot box provides a tremendous amount of access to the social consumption market and data recovery and data research with regards to that. So the hot box is a pioneering social consumption of cannabis with agile and accessible spaces for the people. Hotbox International is solving the problem of social consumption through innovative design and development of safe, responsible, and sustainable spaces for convenient cannabis consumption. We were developed out of Denver, Colorado, and we're working closely with the state of Oregon, the city of Portland. In fact, I think Portland's going to probably place a hotbox sometime this summer as well. We're also working in Washington State and California and looking to serve the entire nation of Canada with their recent decriminalization. With that, let me share with you some of the exciting things about the hotbox. It's both a temporary unit that you can place like you would a beer garden at a festival, or it can be a permanent unit that is bolted onto an existing retail facility or co-located with that retail facility. What's exciting about it is that we can rent it, or it's a Connex trailer that's been adapted. We have both, it's very state-of-the-art air quality recirculation in there. It changes the air inside the hot box container every 7 minutes and constantly changes the fresh air in there and keeps all of the external smoke from getting outside of the box. It's an innovation that's come out of Europe, and we're just lucky to have found it and be able to solve that problem. I had a woman quietly tell me that here in the community, I mean, if she smells marijuana, it makes her violently ill. And that's disturbing to me. I don't want anybody to be hurt or sick. I don't want our kids exposed to this. And at the same time, it's happening, you know. People are going to sneak off into the woods at the state fair. They are. It's just happening. And so the way I approach those sorts of things is I look to find a win-win solution that isn't part of the debate thing. And so in order to achieve that, we've developed this innovative solution. As I stated, we're hoping to do more public-private partnerships. We're doing one with Denver. I'll have a model box down there for you to see. Additionally, what's exciting to me is that we are collaborating with the University of Colorado to do social anthropology research at the hotbox, which we would love to give to DHHSS. And we've got an app that is integrated into the use, so every single consumer that comes into the hotbox, we derive data from them, their consumption patterns, you know, why they do it, where they're there, all the information that we're all desperate to have our hands on. Currently, there's, as you heard, there's very little data about it. We have ancillary data, we have rumor, but true scientific research is something that we're going to be excited about being able to build a data bank for and develop the big data we all need to make right decisions about treatment and people that have problems, right? Keeping kids out of it. The other thing that's great about it is that it becomes a focal point for education. We heard earlier about folks wanting to educate people about the negative aspects of things, but also educating them. They're sitting there, they're smoking, and they're being educated and influenced and given information that's vital to them coming out of the shadows with regards to this. 71% of cannabis is consumed socially, and I can share all these statistics with you afterwards. I'm happy to. And we know that the data we have, 97% of cannabis users smoke. They don't use edibles. They're still smoking. So we're trying to solve that problem by providing that solution. We provide a safe and legal and convenient consumption space that protects the public and provides for a really wonderful place for people to socially consume their cannabis. Also, I think the one thing that's also super exciting to me, which I've been really nervous about, is intoxication. We've heard a lot about it today, off and on, and there's really, how do you know if somebody's too stoned to drive? How do you know those things? We've been really concerned about that, and over the last 4 years, as part of our research and development, really, we've spent 5 years. We'll have our first one the end of this month. So we're not just jumping on the bandwagon here. We've collaborated with TIPS. TIPS is a leading 30-year alcohol intoxication training program for all servers and others around the world. We are co-creating with them exclusively a marijuana and cannabis intoxication program to be utilized with the hot box, but also elsewhere. So we feel as though this unit has really met a lot of the concerns that are out there and a lot of the challenges that are out there, and we just really appreciate the opportunity here today to let you know about that, to let you know that there are solutions to the big, huge challenges that are being brought to the table, and that we've spent a great deal of time creating that. The other thing I want to close with here is that the partners we've been working with in Denver, which is somewhat a leading city and state with regards to decriminalization and the issues of legalization, the counselors, two of the counselors on the Denver Council have offered to speak directly to the regulators because we don't want it to be influenced like we're trying to hustle something. Give you guys a chance to talk peer-to-peer about how those things have been solved and what they're looking at with regards to their challenges. And when I send over our presentation for the public record, I'll add in those names for you to be able to call them. They've offered it. We didn't even ask. They offered. And that'll give you a chance to talk to your peers rather than being, quote-unquote, marketed, if you will, with regards to this. And I just hear so much tension in my community around this needing to be solved, and there's really no solution. And it's kind of been breaking me because I think we've come up with that, and not just as a business hustle, but as a true social enterprise. I swear to you, if I had all the money in the world from working with the oil and gas companies my entire career, I would donate these things. I would. I'd donate them to cities to solve the problem because it's painful. It's painful to watch everybody struggle. And so I really appreciate you letting us at least introduce this publicly within the state and to offer it up to regulators to review, talk to us about what's happened, take a look at our education materials. I want to also point out that the Hot Box already comes with an operations program, a waste management program, an intoxication program, and we have it integrated with an app, a mobile app, to ensure that we're properly understanding all of the consumers that are coming into our facilities. Thank you so much for letting me speak with you today. You have so many complex things to deal with, and I'm open for any questions or any other additional information you may have.
Well, thanks, Ms. Burke. Anybody any questions for her? All right. Well, thanks for coming.
You're most welcome, and thanks again for the time. I'll send that over. Sure. I'll send that over, and so it can be made publicly available, right, and send you the names. Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, well, let's take like 5, 6, 7, 8 minute break.
I was going to say, isn't it?
And then we'll come back and do the director's report.
Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. That entry is not valid. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. That entry is not valid. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. That entry is not valid. Your call could not be completed. Please try your call again later. The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end. Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Thank you. Please stand by. If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Your conference will begin when the chairperson arrives. Please wait. You are being placed into conference in listen-only mode. There are 14 participants in the conference.
All right, we're back on the record, and I did neglect something that I need to mention since yesterday was the the 40th anniversary of Cheap Trick's concert at Budokan. I definitely have to say hello, kiddies. So, Director, with that, we will pursue your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're having a side conversation, if you could take it outside, thank you. All right, we have 2 vacancies at AMCO currently, our Program Coordinator 1 position and our Regulations Specialist position, and I am working on evaluating our needs and will be moving to either fill or modify those positions shortly. We have a section here regarding the activities of our local government specialist, Jed Smith, who is here in case you have questions for him. But in the first quarter of 2019, he has had 2 meetings of the testing working group to continue developing those regulatory changes for the board. He's been working with the Department of Law's Office of Special Prosecution to update the local option database for the alcohol program. He presented to a chemistry of cannabis class at UAF, presented on the Title IV rewrite to the Homer Chamber of Commerce, presented alcohol licensing information to the Northeast Community Council in Anchorage, has ongoing collaboration and information sharing with various organizations and departments in both the alcohol and marijuana programs, and has assisted in 3 academic research studies involving alcohol or marijuana licensing and regulation. These are significant activities, but of course he has continuing ongoing assistance to local governments and licensees for assistance with our statutes and regulations.
Who are those academic studies? Are those in Alaska or are those out of state?
That's a great question, and I'm going to have Mr. Smith answer that.
Out of state, okay. We'll get copies of them when they're done. Okay.
Okay. Last month I reported to you on the absent and arms issue. And one of the things I reported was that DPS had agreed to provide specific information contained in arms or absent to investigators when requested for specific investigations. And I wanted to follow up on that to report that while some information has been provided in a timely manner, some requests have been ignored or go unfilled even after repeated requests. So this continues to be a frustration for the office. And
Mr. Chair?
in addition,
sort of facetiously, we will be willing to work with Public Health on their data requests if their commissioner tells the Department of Public Safety Commissioner to give us access. Can we leverage one state department to work on another one?
Don't need a second for that motion.
Motion, it was a facetious statement.
I know it. It was well put.
in addition, you may recall from the initial letter from the Department of Public Safety from November 1st of 2018 that was signed by Major Greenstreet that they had promised to provide AMCO with a list and brief summary of all incidents that we had put into arms, and we have not been provided with that information. And I expect Chief Holscher can provide you with more information or answer any questions you might have on that issue when he comes up for his enforcement report.
Mr. Chair? More serious than my previous discussion. What can be done in terms of, I mean, I realize we as a board, send a letter would be totally ignored. But what is the role of I guess, Commissioner of Commerce, the Attorney General, in, having the discussions with public safety about, the status of our investigators, the status of them as law enforcement personnel, and leveraging that out. I mean, AMCO as a board, or even with the alcohol board, we're not going to have much say. If a major buried down in the Department of Public Safety can say no, where is the commissioner, the Attorney General that has to make any legal cases in all of this? And I'm real serious about that as to, we're going to have no impact on that, but they should and could. And so I'm just wondering where that might be.
Through the Chair, Mr. Jones, at the last meeting I reported that Chair Klein and Chair Springer had signed a joint letter to Commissioner Anderson requesting that she ask for an Attorney General opinion regarding whether or not AMCO investigators were considered peace officers under the statute. Access to arms and absent are provided based on one of two qualifications. One is to qualify as a criminal justice agency, and it's very debatable whether AMCO is a criminal justice agency, but the other is for providing that access to peace officers. And for decades, the interpretation of the state, including DPS, has been that AMCO investigators are considered peace officers. The Department of Public Safety changed this interpretation in November of 2018, and I have not been provided with a very clear explanation of why they changed that interpretation. So Chair Springer and Chair Klein sent a joint letter to Commissioner Anderson asking for her to request the Attorney General to write an opinion on whether or not AMCO investigators are considered peace officers.
And I'll note for the record that I haven't received a response from Commissioner Anderson on that letter. Are you aware, or Ms. Milks, are you aware of any correspondence from the Commissioner of Commerce to the Attorney General in that matter?
I'm not, and I feel reasonably confident that if it had been received, in all likelihood, I would have been made aware of that, but I'm not.
Thank you.
So I was informally notified that, and this was back in January, that the commissioner was going to postpone consideration of that request until after the governor's budget was released on February 13th. The significance of that date was that at that time, it was also noted the governor's administrative order, which proposed to shift AMCO investigators into the Department of Law into a investigative unit. I think, and I'm speculating here, but I think that the commissioner was under the impression that this would be resolved by AMCO investigators moving into the Department of Law. I did inquire of Commissioner Price of DPS whether or not AMCO investigators, if they were in the Department of Law, would they be provided access to absent in arms, and her response was, we are still going to follow the statutes. So if the statutes don't change, I don't see DPS's interpretation. So the next step, I believe, and I've talked about this a little bit with Chair Springer, although not yet with Chair Klein, is to have the chairs of the board make the direct request to the Attorney General for an Attorney General opinion as to whether or not AMCO investigators are peace officers under the statutes.
Which I believe we have at least the Marijuana Board has the wherewithal to do, since we're just administratively in the Department of Commerce.
Correct. Yes.
Is that a correct supposition, that we could, the board, at least this board and possibly jointly, we could directly request the Attorney General for an opinion?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So Chair Springer could do this on his own. I think it's stronger if it comes from both boards. I just haven't had the opportunity to talk with Chair Klein, so that is on my to-do list for early next week. So one way or another, a request that is either from both boards or just from the Marijuana Board will go forth to the Attorney General requesting an opinion on this issue.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just elaborate on my answer just a second ago, there isn't any statutory prohibition that I'm aware of that would prevent the chair of this board and or the chair of the ABC board from making a request directly to the Attorney General for an opinion. If it's a matter of public safety, if it's a matter of your being able to do your job, certainly some line of communication should be pursued. But again, there's no direct prohibition on approaching the Attorney General directly.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on in my report. I have no additional information regarding the proposed move of AMCO investigators into the Department of Law. Nobody has reached out to me, and I haven't had time to reach out to anyone. So that's something on my list of things to do.
When he gets his report, we'll ask him.
Well, to my knowledge, there's been no official information provided to Mr.
Well, yeah, not officially. I mean, there's been. I think that maybe people have been talking. I like rumors as much as fact.
I want to note to the board, I reported last month that the governor's proposed FY20 budget does reduce AMCO's budget by $48,700, and that is cut entirely from travel. I was informally told that there is an expectation that AMCO's travel expenditures in FY20 be reduced from FY19 by 50%. This is not really workable for our agency because our travel costs relate to either statutorily required board travel to go to meetings in different judicial districts in the state, or what I consider to be statutorily required investigator travel to fulfill their duties under the statute to go to licensed premises for inspections and investigations. At the way this is being handled in the administration is that we have been requested to submit travel plans that set forth every anticipated trip that we will be taking in FY20. Naturally, we don't know every, we've of course been able to put our board meeting trips out there, but we don't know every enforcement trip. So we have estimated a number of trips that are based on historical in the last couple years, and we have put forward this in our FY20 travel plan that we submitted to the Commissioner's office. Again, the anticipated costs of that travel plan do not reflect a 50% reduction from this year's travel costs. I haven't received any feedback yet on that, but when I do, I will report it to the board. Moving on to the next section, testing oversight. For 2016, it really isn't important. AMCO contracted with a company called A2LA to inspect testing facilities after the board approved an application, but before a license was issued. That contract expires at the end of June, and I think that considering that the board had put in a legislative request to shift testing oversight to the Department of Environmental Conservation, which this issue is kind of mixed up with the regulations project that is coming up, so I'm not really sure what to say here and what to say there, but there isn't going to be in this session any statutory change to shift oversight from the board to DEC. But we have been working very collaboratively with DEC to develop an RSA to make the Environmental Health Laboratory within DEC become the board's contractor at the end of the A2LA contract, so starting in FY20. Here with us at this meeting are Patrice McKinney, who is the chief of the Environmental Health Laboratory, and Steve Krupe, who is the Laboratory Quality Systems Manager. They're here. I think they can answer questions that you may have about this that I may not be able to answer, and they're also going to be here, I think, when the regulations project comes up. But we're very excited about our collaboration with the Environmental Health Laboratory. I think it provides more flexibility for oversight of testing labs. At this point, A2LA would only be involved prior to post-board approval, but prior to actually getting a license. But if there became an issue with a lab, we were not calling A2LA to come up and do anything. So having an agreement with our partner agency here in the state just gives us a much more workable system in assisting us with lab oversight, because as you well know, there's nobody on the staff who is a scientist who can really delve into the very technical details of marijuana testing. So this will come up more when we get to tab 15 at that regulations change, but I am moving forward with replacing A2LA as the board's contractor with the Environmental Health Lab through a reciprocal services agreement. And we have confirmed with the Department of Law that there is no impediment to developing an agreement with another state agency to become the board's contractor with regards to sort of procurement and that sort of thing. Is there any questions on that, or any questions for Ms. McKinney or Mr. Krupe? Okay. Moving on to a question for the board regarding particularly our cultivation and our product manufacturing applications. And I've only quoted the regulation in the cultivation section, but it states that an applicant for a cultivation facility must include in their application fertilizers, chemicals, gases, and delivery systems, including carbon dioxide management to be used. On our application, staff has separated this question into two different sections, one that's just for pesticides, and we require an applicant to provide the EPA pesticide number of what they're going to use so that it's easy to look at DEC's approved pesticide list. So that's not an issue. But the other question regards fertilizers, chemicals, and gases. And what staff needs to know from the board is how detailed do you want the responses in this section to be? For example, and this is an example you'll see later in the meeting, is an acceptable response to say a variety of approved nutrients from multiple companies? Or does the board want, specific listing of actual products, and then if a licensee decides they want to change, are you only referring to chemicals that might be somehow, sprayed on attached to plants in which case this really only refers to cultivation facilities, or are you also looking for information about chemicals that can be used to clean equipment or clean the facility? And certainly in product manufacturing, it's a potential issue when you have chemicals that are used to clean equipment. Sometimes the residues of those chemicals can show up in products that are made later. So I don't know if you have to answer this very minute, but the staff is looking for guidance on this. So perhaps ponder that and we can come back to that at some point during this meeting. Moving on to legislation, as of last week, which I think is still valid today, no legislation has been introduced that directly affects Chapter 1738 and the regulation of the commercial marijuana program. There are two significant bills on the alcohol side moving that take a significant portion of my time. There is a hearing this afternoon at 3:15 on Senate Bill 16. Depending on where we are, I may need to step out for that. I didn't, in the report that I sent to you earlier and that is posted on the website, actually remember to attach the regulation spreadsheet. I have replaced the report on your tab with the regulation spreadsheet, and we'll get that uploaded to the website at some point soon. We are a little bit behind on providing you drafts on regulations, so that'll be one of my focuses for the July meeting, is to catch up on projects that you've indicated you want to start on, but that we don't have drafts on. The next meeting is scheduled for July 10th through 12th in Fairbanks. I've just been informed that we're going to be meeting at the Borough Assembly Chambers. And applications must be complete, and any other documents for the board must be submitted to our office by June 21st in order to be on that agenda. I've provided you with the normal statistics regarding retail sales and taxes, but I wanted to specifically speak about the taxes section because there have been some changes, and I would note that Kelly Mazzei from the Department of Revenue is here in case you have any questions. So prior to January 1st of this year, the number that was provided in your report was the amount of taxes that were assessed based on the Department of Revenue's evaluation of data and metric. Starting in January, the reporting number now is the amount of taxes assessed based on filed returns filed with the department. So this number, the January and the February numbers, would not include taxes owed by someone who failed to file. In addition, they will no longer be providing the number of taxpayers who paid into the taxes assessed on any given month. This relates to privacy issues, but I also think, the board knows the number of or is provided the number of licensed cultivators, so I'm not sure that that number is super significant to you. The Department of Revenue will be updating the taxes assessed amount as late returns may be filed. So certainly we can come back and provide updated information to you. So if you want me to change my reporting to you in any way, let me know. But that is a change. And I think that's enough for my report.
Hey, thanks. If you haven't seen the numbers here, total retail sales from program inception to 3/31/19. Somebody say prices right earlier. $225,438,842. So I'd say that's a fairly substantial dollar capture by the industry, and $25,242,050 in taxes. So Eliza, Ms. Muse from DPH said they've got, a couple of $3 million in the bank right now because they just started drawing down. So this other $25 million is in the general fund, right?
Mr. Chair, I apologize, but I don't track what happens to the taxes because it doesn't affect what my office does.
So would Ms. Mazzei be able to shed any light? Oh, please do. Yeah, come on up. You're as important as we are to most everybody in the room.
Thanks for having us here today, too. So for the taxes, I think it
Go
was
ahead, just
actually,
identify yourself real quick.
I'm sorry.
You want to just identify yourself real quick for the record?
Sure, Kelly Vizay, manager of the excise tax for the state of Alaska. And Mr. Chair, to answer your question, I think it was spoken about earlier really well by public health, that about the 25% that goes into the marijuana education fund. The other 50% goes to the recidivism reduction fund. The other 25% is not designated and in the general fund. However, all the money goes to the general fund.
Okay, so we have recidivism, is that DOC or who runs that?
I believe the Department of Administration makes the transfer, and then it's allowed by statute to be used by certain agencies, and that could include Public Safety, Department of Corrections, and possibly parole, which might be under corrections also.
Okay, then could we invite those departments to come to our meeting in July? Fairbanks is nice in July, and it's a nice meeting room. I'd really like to. I think maybe the rest of the board would like to know how this money is being directed. That's why I was glad that Eliza was here. That was one of my questions. And the recidivism funding, and I think that the taxpayers would be interested to see where the money's going, because we can't just blanket say, oh yeah, it's going into the general fund, we're making a big contribution to the state. We're actually making contribution to specific programs of the state.
Mr. Chair, I agree, and I can say that we get in tax division numerous phone calls of interested parties looking to know exactly how the money's spent, and it's pretty complicated. The statute goes into so many different ways the money can be spent and who can spend it, and it's actually hard to figure out in the budget where it actually is being appropriated. But it is pretty complex, and I would say that the folks that deal with that should be the ones to speak about it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The comment that the director made in terms of the number of taxpayers and saying that we know the numbers, I guess in some ways I'd like to see some differences there, because I know these numbers are old, but when I go to Michael's licensing report, it basically says we have 178 cultivators, limited and standard, that are licensed and operating. This says in January there were 146. That's 32 difference, and yet the tax went down in February, and we don't know the number. And I know we just met in February. We didn't probably add 30 new cultivators at our last meeting. So I guess I would like to know, the numbers that are paying in to the tax. I think that's an enforcement issue, and I know there's data sharing issues between what the tax division can tell us and what isn't, about who's paying and who isn't, because that is a sanction that we can impose, and that's a difficult thing to figure out. But, to look at our numbers, say 178, and tax go down in February, I guess that's a piece of data that's...
Through the chair, Mr. Jones, so first of all, the taxes could have gone down because people didn't file returns. Secondly, the number of taxpayers any given month will also relate to who's harvested and sold that month. So it may be that there are some cultivators who are, I don't know how different cultivators do their work. Some probably have a lot of rotating harvest batches, so that they're kind of always doing some harvesting, and some, particularly maybe the smaller ones, only have one. Most of our limited cultivators only have one room, and so maybe for a particular month, they're still within their growing period and they didn't actually harvest or sell anything that month. So I get your point, but I think knowing who harvested and sold that month isn't necessarily what you want to know, although of course you get to tell me what you want to know. But
I guess I understand that a little bit, but when we as a local government look at taxes, sales taxes. You know, if a business traditionally, you know, pays taxes on a routine basis and they don't, we pay attention. We require certain businesses of certain sizes to report monthly whether they have sales or not. And, you know, we have placed businesses in Juneau that are pretty seasonal. You know, they open up when the first cruise ship shows up and the last cruise ship leaves, they close their business. We still require them to report every month or every quarter saying no sales tax owed. And I don't know how the tax division does it, but for us, it would be, so somewhere along in there, there's got to be a happy medium to know, you know, this month, AMCO says there's 178 cultivators. In this month, 142 reported paying taxes. What happened to the other 38? Are all 38 still in the growing cycle? Or who isn't paying? Or, because there are flags in that kind of data. And it may not be important for us as a board. It may well be important for the tax division and or for enforcement.
Mr. Jones, through the chair, you bring up a good point. It's been hard for us to play around with the numbers to see the best way to report it. We had for a while, we were only reporting the number of taxpayers who actually paid a tax in that monthly period that we were reporting. That way we could, if you decided to do an average of what number of taxpayers that was paying a tax, that was going to be a more meaningful number. Then we started having some people go out of business. Then we started seeing zero returns. We also saw a high number of active operating licensees that never did have a taxable transfer. So whether or not it took them a while to get started or they're still in some sort of planning stage, we did see quite a few folks that just never made it, and maybe their license didn't suspend or get turned in or out of business right away. And so those numbers might have been skewed a little bit from active operating.
Kelly, do you require a licensee to file a return if they had no taxable events?
Through the chair, yes, we do require what we call a zero tax return in most of our tax types. So if somebody didn't have any taxable transfers, they go in, they file electronically, and they file a zero return. We actually, because we wanted a more meaningful number of the number of taxpayers that actually paid a tax in a monthly period, we sometimes filtered out the zero return. So that could be a big difference between your, like for instance, 146 paying taxpayers and 175 active operating licenses.
How's compliance on that, on the zero tax returns in the cultivators, with the cultivators? Have you seen any problems? Or?
Through the chair, or Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I guess we've looked at the zero tax returns and we can look at metrics so we can see if there's taxable transfers. So that's where most of our enforcement and compliance comes in. We don't really look at was metric correct. At this point, there's so much data, it would be hard to I guess, look at it that closely without it being a compliance project, maybe done by an auditor. But most of the time it makes sense or it looks reasonable based on other cultivators.
Well, yeah, and I'm just thinking, you know, we've had a couple of discussions with cultivators that have hopefully by now entered into repayment agreements with you, and they said, well, you know, we get behind that. It might be maybe you could write just a boilerplate circular letter to give to us, to give to new cultivator licensees that says, remember, the day you get your license, you know, on day 30 after having your license, whether you even turn the lights on or not, file a zero tax return, just so they get in the habit of doing that, just so they get in the habit of having that relationship, because then they get a couple of months that they've done transfers, and then all of a sudden you guys are saying, you know, we see in metric that you've been selling product, where's your tax filing?
Sure, and Mr. Chair, we actually do that. We can see when a new licensee comes on board, and we actually track it from some of the meetings after they've been approved and when they become active. And we reach out to them proactively, and we have a welcome packet that we send. We send a follow-up email, and then we actually call we actually call every single cultivator and go through a checklist to remind everybody of their obligation.
Great, that's perfect, perfect. Okay,
But
cool.
we've also had some cultivators say, well, my first crop didn't go very well, or it failed, or, I really, and so, if somebody who's filed every month suddenly files a none, I would think James would like to know that, because then he can go into Metric and see if they wasted, 25 or 80 plants or not. So, I just think there is some value in the numbers. It's difficult to share. A number collected for their purpose may or may not serve our purposes. Numbers we collect might help them, but I don't know. I'm confusing the issues for myself, but I do think there's some value in knowing where and why there's such a difference in numbers if it stays as large as 30 cultivators a month. That would be a big difference for me.
So if I could just say one more thing, Mr. Jones, through the chair, it would be our pleasure to take another look at that and see if there's any way that we can produce for the board meetings at the least of the number of taxpayers and maybe reasons for the discrepancy.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that at some point, maybe in the 2022 budget, we should maybe get together with revenue and request a data analyst or something, So who's more fun, us or the oil companies? You don't have to answer that.
Mr. Chair, can I sit down now?
Yes, you may. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so now we're up to
At least we're not all lawyers.
Yeah, that's right. So we're up to the tabs on the director briefing. We've got the States Act, which we will probably hear more about when the posse gets back from Washington. So this is in here pretty much just informational. It's a Senate bill that I don't think it's got a corollary in the House yet. And the other one that I asked to put on here is about Massachusetts's social equity program. And if you haven't downloaded the agenda, I would encourage anybody who is interested in having a robust and diverse cannabis industry in the state to look at this little PowerPoint presentation from the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, where they recognize that a significant number of incarcerations over the last, 40 or 50 years in the Commonwealth were people of color, and they were dope busts. And they said, we need to set up a program here where under the color of law, under their act, we are going to be equitable in assuring that people who have been essentially, should I use the O word, who have been oppressed under previous, marijuana laws in particular, in the Commonwealth, which is where I'm from originally, so I'm real glad they're doing this. They have got a formal structure and they've identified communities where these impacts have been high historically, and they've got a 40-page PowerPoint. I didn't read all of it last night, but I'm going to continue to read it. They've got a program where they set up mentorship, where somebody from, inner city Springfield, which is almost as inner city as you get, who says, I'd like to have a retail store here and service my community, then they will proactively hook them up with, Brandon Emmett, a successful entrepreneur, and say, okay, teach this guy how to do it and help him find capital. So I continue to think, nothing personal, just business, I continue to think that, for the record, the demographic of this industry is my own opinion, sucks. It doesn't necessarily reflect Alaska as well as it could. And I hope that it will, reflect, we got rural communities where people are going in to start businesses, and they're coming from out of town, So if you know somebody who's a minority entrepreneur, help them out. We know that the money that's in the industry is Alaska money. Okay? Some of it's money people brought themselves, some of it's money they've been able to gather up. So obviously there are people who have the skills to go out and pitch investors for the cannabis industry. If you know somebody who's Alaska Native, who's African American, who's actually we've got a little bit of representation of the Asian community in the business. You know, we've got. I'm not. Well, all right. I'll be honest. Before I said African American, I was about to use the Yupik word for it because that's the first one that came to mind, which is not pejorative. It's just the way they say it. But anyways, you guys get my point. So you know what? Download this. Take a look at it. Think about it. If you're in some kind of a position to help grow the industry in this fashion, please do. Okay, which brings us to draft policy on newspapers of general circulation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in both the alcohol statutes and regulations and the marijuana regulations, there's a requirement for applications to be noticed in a newspaper of general circulation for 3 successive weeks. And for years, there's been confusion about exactly what qualifies, and there was some recent confusion. And so we have tried, and this exact same policy was also presented to the ABC board earlier this week, but our staff has put together guidance for the board's consideration regarding what qualifies as a newspaper of general circulation for the purposes of meeting the regulations. As you can see from sort of my intro, you know, the Supreme Court weighed in regarding news of general interest and reaches a diverse readership. And I think those are kind of the 2 key points. I would note, as something that was pointed out by the ABC board, is that we talked about a news, on the first page of the actual policy, we talk about a newspaper of general circulation is a newspaper having a subscription list of paying subscribers, but we actually have a newspaper on this list, the Anchorage Press, which is free. So the ABC board suggested we make a revision based on that in sort of the general guidance up at the top. And then it was also noted that on the alcohol side, there are certain places where you can do a radio advertisement instead. The marijuana side says in areas where no newspaper circulates, the applicant can do a radio station. I'm not super familiar with, in fact, I'm not familiar at all with some of the communities that are more remote, such as Ruby or Bettles. So I have those communities listed under Fairbanks Daily News Minor, but maybe it would be more appropriate for them to do radio advertising. I would leave that to others to determine. But you would note, please note that there are some communities sort of towards the bottom of the second page, which are more in northwest and southwest Alaska, where there doesn't appear to be a newspaper of general circulation, and so the guidance of this document is to use radio advertising. So I think we're very open to adjustments to this if the board thinks that's appropriate, but we wanted to propose this to you for sort of your blessing.
Good, Nick?
I was the cause of half of this confusion. You know, the paid subscription list, I think is a problem because I'm not sure the Delta Discovery has a subscription of that type. It's a pick up by newspaper. I'm disappointed to not see things on here like the Alaska Journal of Commerce. You know, if you ever look at that thing, there's hundreds of legal ads, public notices, and I don't know how we take into account that I haven't had a newspaper delivered to my house in 5 years. Everybody gets their news online. You know, so are we requiring it to be a local newspaper that is actually produced at market, which is almost non-existent today? A lot of these papers are produced in big print houses and then moved, and then we don't take into account that, you know, I'd say 70-80% of the people today get their news online. And so those are my concerns, right? And like I said, I dealt with this. I think my public notice got published 12 times, to be quite honest with you.
Everybody in Bethel knows about it.
Through the chair, Mr. Miller, I appreciate your comments, and I didn't want to identify you, but, yeah. So there's several thoughts I have related to your comments. One is that certainly the board could determine that the Journal of Commerce is a newspaper of general circulation. I personally have concerns that it is considered to contain news of general interest. It is focused on business, business. And business, to me, is a very specific thing and is not sort of general interest to the community. But if the board determines that it qualifies, then we'll add it to the list. The other thing is that this requirement exists in regulation, and the board could determine that newspapers just aren't the way people get their news anymore, and you can change the regulation to require applications to be noticed in some other way. On the alcohol side, it's more in statute, so it's harder for that to be changed. But on this side, and unless Ms. Milks disagrees with me, I think you have the flexibility to say, newspapers aren't relevant enough today to have this requirement, but that would be a regulations project.
I would concur with those comments, and also note that the only case law we have really is from 1976. So newspapers are evolving like a lot of things, but you certainly are within your authority to look at that issue.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Milks and the director and I had several email conversations about this because my 25 years with the state, I did a lot of regulatory processes and a lot of notices, and we were always fighting how to get it in a paper in the appropriate amount of time and get the right distribution. And at the same time, we would almost always and invariably run into, well, nobody told me. Because when you look at a newspaper, we talked about display ads versus putting in an illegal notice back in the want ads. If the notices are a display ad in the first 3 pages of a newspaper, that generally will get more circulation than if it's an online public notice. Or I can tell you in the last 5 years, I have not gone out to the state of Alaska public notice section to look at all of the public notices that get published almost every day about things with the state, because one, it doesn't interest me, and two, it'd be very difficult to find a specific thing if I went to look for it. And so I like this, and I don't have any objection to that. I think in some communities, some of the problems with this get fixed. We have a conditional use permit. So if an alcohol business come in and wants a conditional use permit, we have rules. You will notify in person, in writing, every resident or business within 500 feet of your business. We do public notices in the newspaper, online, about the agendas for the meetings so people could come and comment. We sometimes hold neighborhood meetings. So, locally, we take care of a lot of the kind of issues I know we're trying to address, to say to a neighbor or somebody in the public, here's a new business coming in, and this is the business, and this is why it's important. I don't know how you could require somebody to do something online, given the various platforms under which a person may or may not participate. We wouldn't want somebody to suddenly put an ad out on Facebook that showed up on every Facebook in Anchorage. But Facebook will do that if you pay them enough, because as a politician, I know I can get my ad into Facebook on election time and have every resident in Juneau that can vote for me, it'll show up on their Facebook. But I don't know that we want to go there. But I don't know who else.
That was for, requiring the newspaper.
Can you speak into your mic?
Yeah. For clarification, that was requiring the newspaper that we advertise in, that everybody goes to that newspaper online. You don't get the newspaper delivered, not
Right.
just a general publication.
Yeah, but I find it difficult online to get to the public notices, to the want ads. Generally, if I go to the want ads online, it's because somebody tweeted, did you know that so-and-so was advertising something? And you click on that link and it takes you there, but I don't go to the ADN, or to the Juneau Empire. In fact, Juneau Empire you can't get online unless you pay for it, unless you have a print subscription. And my wife wants a print subscription, so I still get it. But that's not normally where a person goes that reads online. You can go online to look at articles. You don't go online to look at want ads or the legal notices, or to know that, there's a public event tomorrow that you might see in a display ad if you actually had a piece of paper. So I don't have any objection to this. I think this is, as far as it goes, it's probably the cheapest for our industry, to put an ad in the paper, for 3 weeks, twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever, than it would be to, they have to go through and figure out 15 different electronic platforms that they would have to advertise on and go through all that process. So I think for general circulation, this is probably the easiest and cheapest for the industry.
The newspaper, at least with the newspaper, you get a tear sheet. You get proof that the advertisement ran. And that's what we want. That's what we want the applicants to be able to do. Supports the local economy, buying the ad in there. The only thing I would change on this maybe is the newspaper general circulation is, last one, this is a newspaper having public distribution points in the city, borough, maybe common municipality or region, because YK Delta is 56 communities, and who knows where else we're going to get applications from besides Bethel. Northwest Arctic Borough, same thing, Sewer Peninsula. So, maybe just throw the word region in there as a first step in cracking the local government issue. Because these, we're going to see applications coming from more than these communities. But otherwise, I think this is fine.
What about removing the subscription? What about removing the subscription list? Because, like I said, there's a lot of the smaller ones that don't. They just sell it behind the counter. And I think that would...
I think we can make some revisions to that second bullet as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Can we do the resolution on separation in the next 30 seconds?
I think we can.
Okay.
So I'm asking the board to revise your resolution regarding the separation of personal use and commercial marijuana to add the ability for a testing facility that has been approved by the board before a license is issued and effective to bring small amounts of marijuana and marijuana product onto the licensed premises for the purposes of validating their testing methods. But to be clear that they can't perform any required tests for licensees or for individuals for personal use marijuana until their license is issued. And that personal use thing, I think it's reflected in the statute that the intent, the statute particularly says that a testing facility with a, valid registration from the board can test marijuana for personal use. So there's certainly an argument that the legislature intended that personal use marijuana be tested at a licensed facility. So this is for your consideration. There was some discussion among my staff about us tracking the amount of marijuana that was brought onto these facilities. I think that's a lot of work that I'm not sure would really have.
They don't have metric until they get their license.
Well, right. So they would have to report to us. Right. We're bringing on this amount, and I'm not sure that the effort that would entail would be worth.
Now, did you say that this has gone in front of the testing committee? This concept?
No.
Not that it would particularly mean anything if it did, but if you're getting ready to, I was going to say fire up, but I'm going to put the quarter. If you're getting ready to start running your equipment, you obviously want to make sure it works. You're going to get, looked at maybe now by DEC. They're going to say, shows how it works, and, I don't think we necessarily need to say, track it. We don't necessarily need to say purchase products, although if you're gonna be testing edibles and you're gonna be, testing other stuff, then maybe we should say that, but I think it's okay, good.
Mr. Chair, that was gonna be my suggestion, and my note was, it says bring small amounts of marijuana or marijuana product onto the premises. And I didn't know how to reword it, but, I think there needs to be something in there about purchasing. They made a valid purchase. You can go to a retail store and buy something. You can go to a cultivator and buy a sample. If the idea of testing your equipment and your procedures prior to being licensed so that you know you're correct, and this is no offense to anybody in the audience, but if you go to Joe Blow Home Grow and he gives you a bunch of samples, you don't know anything going on there. But if you get it from a cultivator, that cultivator, eventually you're going to go back and say, hey, this is how my test came out. He says, well, every other test on every other product we've done, has been totally different from your results. Maybe the tester's got to think about it. But if you're getting it from a homegrown that's never been tested before, you wouldn't know if you're out of a standard deviation away from what is there. So when I looked at this, first thing I thought was they could bring it in if they had purchased it from a licensed establishment as opposed to taking it from a personal use. Maybe there's a dual thing. They report that they got so much personal use or that they purchased something. I just question the usefulness of getting a product from the personal use market and then saying that they now can accurately test a product without having a baseline.
So, really, the only place they could purchase is it from a retail store, which at that point it becomes personal use. There's no mechanism in place for them to go buy it from a cultivator or from a manufacturer or anyone. So I think just adding that language either adds confusion or causes more regulation work that might not be necessary. We have a very small amount of testing facilities. It's not like we have 50 of them. We got like 5 now, I think. And I don't suspect we'll have another 5 licensed in the next couple of years. So I just would like to keep it as it is written, and call it good.
Well, I guess I agree, and I think there's something, as you say, if you only place you could really purchase it under our regulations is retail. But if we made a requirement that they purchase it from a retail, if they go into your shop and they buy an edible, it's got the testing results on there. They would be able to go, oh yeah, we got those results, or we didn't. And whether it's their testing procedures or the previous test, I don't want to get into that argument, but at least they would have a baseline of what could have done. Now they can take that label off and put it in their pocket and give it to their technician to see if they come close without telling the technician what they ought to be looking for. But to just take an edible product, anyway, you get where I'm concerned about it. It's not a valid test if you don't have some idea of what you ought to find.
If I could, there's one other sort of complicating factor in that you can buy from national laboratory companies. You can buy, like, matrices, and I'm going to get the vocabulary all wrong. Look to my testing friends over here, lab friends. But so you can actually buy very small quantity samples where I believe the values are actually known so that you know what you're expected to get out. So that would be another place where this could be purchased.
Okay, so do we know what we're doing here? I don't either. Let's wait till July. I would like to.
I don't think we can wait till July.
Yeah.
I think this is an issue.
Well,
we've got a couple up for license.
Coming up. All right. Well,
and we're going to deal with a regulation about
yeah.
DEC lab, and I would like to sort of hear, maybe postpone this till we get to DC lab and make that part of the other regulation process of what they might suggest. But I'm not necessarily willing to say this is okay without some indication in here, that, somehow they should let us know whether this comes out of the personal use market or they purchased it from a retail store and or it becomes their personal use. I think something has to be worded in there, but I don't exactly how. Could be I need lunch.
Well, we allow cultivators to have starts when they get inspected. So it's not like there's a whole lot of difference between those two concepts. Is there on, a testing lab going out, and I'd prefer they bought it from a retailer so they know what it is, or they've gotten kind of like the idea of buying a, test sample from another laboratory.
The board's been very clear about the expectations for a new cultivator about what they can have at the beginning. So I think that's exactly what we're trying to sort of do here. But this can certainly wait till after lunch and the DC regulations.
Okay, fine. I wanted to take a quick point of personal privilege and recognize the distinguished elder of Alaska News, which, if you spell that out, means Dean of the Alaska Press Corps, Steve Heimel over there. And with that, we will be back at a little after 1.